Okay, it's almost 5 after, so I think we'll get started. Gosh, I thought there would be just Sharon and myself here tonight. Nobody else would venture out. Let's see. We'll have a real quick business meeting. We haven't had one in a couple of months. Cindy's going to read minutes from August.
Okay, we met on August 10th. Mary Kimberly welcomed us for new business. She mentioned that there was a 2-volume history of the New York Central College by Marlene Parks, and it was available for purchase. She told us September's program would feature a video on the history of trains in Cortland County. Under old business, Charlie Dello has begun to repair the Civil War cannons in the cemetery. Ron Porter has agreed to paint them once the repairs are completed. The Village of McGraw will provide the paint. Under old business again, we still need a volunteer for president, volunteers for cookies and servers for the next 2 meetings, and to help set up for the meetings. And then she introduced the program, and it was the history of hops in central New York by Matt Ertz, and refreshments were served to 25 people.
Thank you.
Short and sweet.
Any corrections, additions? Somebody to move to accept them?
So moved.
Bill? Second?
Second.
I was going to wait until old business, but thinking about the cannons, Mr. Dello is unbelievable. He's certainly a master carpenter, and he has worked on one of the 2 carriages. Some of the spokes, as they go into the wheel, were, I call it pulpy. I don't know what the proper term would be, but he's replaced them, and you can't tell that they're not the originals. It's wonderful. He has worked on one carriage and has repaired that. I think he's done with that one. The other one he started working on, and he said maybe I could come back and work on that next spring. For some reason or other, that hasn't, I guess I'll use the word deteriorated as much as the other one. I don't know, it's under the shade, but I don't know if that makes a difference or not. Anyways, his bill was $900, and it came out of a savings account that we have that the village takes care of. And originally it was started with an inheritance that we received from Lottie Champlain, and it was around $7,000 at the time. We used some of that when we opened up the new history room. We needed fixtures and whatever, so some of that money was spent for that. I think I forgot to call the office today. I think there's around $7,000 in it now. So his bill is $900. Ron Porter has started painting in between days when it doesn't rain. And he's got 1 carriage is all done. I think he's got 1 barrel also done. I can't remember now. He'll have them finished before it really gets too cold to paint. And he wants to put a 3rd coat on next spring, which I think is a good idea. So his money will come out of our checking account. And we have, unfortunately, I thought I was going to have a treasurer's report tonight, but I will try and include that in the next newsletter. I'm going to have one out either the end of December or the beginning of January, and I'll put the treasurer's report in there so you can see what we have spent and what our income is. Cindy also mentioned the books that Marlene Parks had put together on the New York Central College students. And there's 2 volumes, 600 pages each. About 600 students out of 1,000. She's got obituaries, news articles, photographs. It's unbelievable what she has, what she's found. She spent 4 years accumulating that research, and she's done a super job. She sold 50 sets so far, which amazes me. It's going to be great research information. On Tuesday night, was it Monday or Tuesday night? We went to Glen Haven. Tuesday night. And there's a Mr. Jackson from that area. And Bud Jeremy told a little more about him than what we had in the book. He was a doctor. He was very interested in health, so he bought unprocessed flour from Hope Mills, and he started developing a cereal. The Post brothers from Michigan came to Skaneateles, to this sanitarium, and they took the idea back to Michigan, and you know what you're eating today? Grape nut flakes. It came from Dr. Jackson's idea. I thought that was really interesting.
He called it manula.
Yeah, I knew. Yeah, right. I can't imagine what unprocessed flour would taste like, but anyway. So that brings you up to date. That's kind of old business, but anyways. October, if there's somebody that could come at 2 o'clock on, I don't have the date. It's in here. I'll tell you the date in a minute. Swishers have the nerve to go south, and they've been helping. So it would be about 20 minutes of helping me set up tables, or getting rid of tables and setting up chairs. The 12th, October 12th, it's going to be on Hyde Hall. A friend of a friend would love to come and give us a history of the house. There's a little information in the letter, the newsletter. If you're not getting the newsletter, please sign up on the table where the books are, and I'll make sure that you're on the mailing list. Anyways, construction started in 1812 and was done in 22 years. So it took quite a while to build it. It was the largest private home in the country at that time. So I think it's going to be an interesting program. It's on the north end of, okay dears, Otsego Lake. Okay, very good. I've talked about Hyde Hall. I've talked about the cannons. Anything? Oh, Harry, you want to talk about going on what's going on in Virgil?
First of all, I would like to invite you all to the Virtual Historical Society's next meeting, which is a week from tonight at 7 o'clock in the Virgil Town Hall. We have a new president, Val Ross, who produced the Society's first newsletter, which has to do with Virgil sheep. There was a time in the town of Virgil when there were more sheep than humans. The speaker for next week will be Linda Helms, and she is going to give a live demonstration of skills and tools needed to transform raw wool into cloth. And as a result, the topic of the newsletter is Virgil sheep. The Society meets 4 times a year in March, May, September, and October on the 3rd Thursday. And as a further incentive, the speaker for May 17th of next spring will be Mary Kimberly. And for those of you who may be further interested in joining the society, the dues, like the dues here, is the princely sum of $5 annually. Thank you.
Wasn't it nice to get clapped? Now, first of all, Sharon was going to apologize because she said, this is going to be a little shaky.
Well, I was going to explain.
Okay, you explain it, and then I'm going to say, we're on a train, so of course it's going to be shaky. You explain it.
I was going to explain.
That's why I bring her.
Well, this video, Vince Minella produced it in the 80s. It's really pretty old. And when he made it, he used the latest technology of the time, which was 1-inch tape. And it's been redone and redone and redone several times to the newer technology. And Melanie Arnold, just as a favor to us, she digitized it and put it on my external hard drive. But in the process of all these generations, there's a little shakiness that's ensued, and there's nothing we can do about it. When I first started watching it, I thought, oh, it's because we're on a train, like I was telling Mary. So just pretend you're on a train.
You could just bounce up and down your chair.
I think if we had a grant or Turner Classic Movies or something, we could restore it even better. But she did a good job. She cleaned it up. It's viewable, but there is a little bit of shakiness. It's not you. It's actually on the screen.
And I have a question. Who was here? Oops. Okay. Who was here 10 years? Who attended the first McGraw Historical Society meeting 10 years ago? This was the first program we had. We had it over in the children's room at the library. We had about 25 people in this room where we should have had about 15. We had it on a TV, and the first row of chairs were practically up to the TV. Two ladies came late, and they sat in the two chairs right in front of the TV. I'm sure their noses must have been right on it, and they were not impressed, I can tell you. And we mentioned to everybody, go to the bathroom now, because once we start, you're not going to be able to move. So, I mean, it was standing room only, and we were all like this. Anyways, it was a good program. So I'm trying it again, okay? It's a little better here. If you got the newsletter, I put a little bit about the gee whiz, which I thought was an interesting name for a railroad, but it followed the gee whiz, the Gee River Creek, I guess it was. Richard Palmer from Tully has, I think this is updated. I'm not sure, but I think it's up and updated. He wrote about the trains originally, and I think he just put this out, so I think this is updated. Anyways, the gee whiz went from Cortland to Cincinnati. And as he put in his book, it said it had all the personality and local color normally associated with a short line railroad. Residents along the line knew all the members of the train crew by their first names. Often as not, it is said a train would stop at a farmhouse on signal of a farmer or his wife. On one occasion, the train waited for the wife to run back to the house to get her baby's bottle. Another incident, which could only happen on such a railroad and went down in the annals of local folklore, occurred on February 11th, 1901. When engineer Jonah Miller pulled his train into East Freetown, he noticed something peculiar in the water glass of locomotive number 3. It was a white substance. Soon he found that his locomotive was a foaming. To say Miller was surprised is putting it mildly. Quickly he called L.N. Frederick, the general manager, on the train phone line. Frederick told Miller to remain at East Freetown until he could send out a relief engine. There was milk in the boiler instead of water. An investigation found the man in charge of the milk station at Cincinnati had accidentally turned the wrong valve, and the tender became filled with milk instead of water. Well, needless to say, it became a laughing stock. And it says that could have been a very revolutionary idea, because what could be done is that small railroad could take advantage of being worldwide famous. Suppose that all locomotives on passenger trains were supposed to be supplied with milk at several stations, and while it made steam as a motive power, suppose pipes were brought into use connecting the boiler with the passenger cars. How easy it would be to furnish patrons of the road during the winter months with hot drinks of delicious milk. What a popular road it would be for babies. And the scheme could be carried farther still. by substituting water in which were several pounds of coffee. And in like manner, the passengers could help themselves to this warming beverage at will. The other story, the family story, Carl's cousins, Phil, Mary, and Carolyn Brown lived out on Solon Road. Carolyn Leach, Mary Rutan, and Phil Brown lives up in Rome. They were young, and the farm was right across the road from the railroad. Passenger went down to the railroad tracks. Their parents decided to come into McGraw for a quick errand, and Phil was told he was in charge of Mary and Carolyn. As soon as they left, the three of them decided they were going to go over to the pasture, and they started playing on the railroad tracks. And the gee whiz comes along, and it stops, and the engineer gets off the engine and walks up to the children and says, "Get back home. You're not supposed to be playing on this track." Can you imagine having a train stop, scold the children because they're playing on the track? Engineer got back on the engine, the kids scattered back home. Of course, it was a problem telling their parents about it. They wanted to tell before the engineer did. But I thought that was funny to think that that really happened. Anyway, let me turn off the lights. The Cortland County Historical Society is selling these books. I don't know if there's anyone interested. I just brought a few. They're on the back table. And there's also, Dick Palmer's done a book on the trolleys. This is $20 and the trolley book is $7.50, just in case you're interested in it, okay?
Look yonder coming down that railroad track. Hey, look yonder coming down that railroad track. It's the Orange Blossom Special, bringing my baby back. Talk about it traveling, she's the fastest train on the line. Talk about it traveling, she's the fastest train on the line. She's the Orange Blossom Special, rolling down that seaboard line.
Lehigh Valley, New York and Erie, Syracuse, Binghamton, and New York, Utica, Shenango, and Cortland, Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western, Erie and Central, Elmira, Cortland, and Northern. All names of lines which traveled the rails of Cortland County. Their history stands as markers of geographic and economic growth. To recall the past is to relive the exuberance, excitement, and discovery of the early days of this county's history. It was a time of simple joys and limited communication. Cortland today is a city with a population of approximately 22,000. It is connected to the outside world by a massive interstate highway system running north, south, east, and west. Some of that interstate system parallels the tracks of trains which no longer run. The natural topography and climate, the environs of Cortland have always been largely agricultural. Looking out over the rolling hills and fertile valleys, one sees herds of grazing cattle, acres of corn and hay, and huge harvest stores of feed. As a major industry, farming and dairies have been economic stabilizers for the area. At a time when our nation was growing and cities began to flourish, railroads played a major role as the primary mode of transportation for industry as well as passenger service. Railroads had their beginning in Cortland in 1848 when a state charter was authorized for the construction and maintenance of a railroad from Syracuse to the village of Binghamton, passing through Homer and Cortland. It was to be called the Syracuse and Binghamton Railroad. The link was completed on the 9th day of October, 1854. At a point about 1.5 miles south of Cortland, the rails were joined. A stockholder, Mr. E.S. Gold, addressing an audience composed primarily of construction workers, said, "Syracuse and Binghamton are firmly united with these bars of iron, and what your strong hands have joined together, let no man put asunder." 3 cheers were given, and the 2 locomotives present joined in producing a terrific scream, which was answered by 6 discharges of cannon on Courthouse Hill. The first engine on the new road was appropriately named the Homer. When planning the Syracuse and Binghamton Railroad through Cortland, the chief engineer, W.B. Gilbert, estimated the cost of the road and equipment at $2.5 million. His estimate exceeded the actual cost by $52,000. Gilbert delivered the road complete with locomotives, cars, rails, water tanks, engine houses, station houses, FOB Onondaga, Cortland, and Broome counties for $2.5 million, less a 2% discount. Thus it began in 1854. The railroad would soon become the Syracuse, Binghamton, and New York, and form a passenger and freight link which joined with the New York and Erie Railroad at Binghamton for east-west connections. An 1855 timetable scheduled 8 regular trains a day and listed Cortland as the meeting point for many of the opposing trains. In 1886, there were 65 carloads of freight being shipped out of Homer daily. The railroad and Cortland County prospered together. Early agricultural shipments included butter, cheese, hay, potatoes, and livestock. With the increasing development of our dairy farms, the daily tonnage of whole milk shipments was the most desirable item of all. Later, crop rotation practices brought bills of lading for carloads of cabbages, canned peas, and beans. This productivity brought about the construction of a series of connecting rail lines to outlying villages, including Preble and McGraw. Industries began to spring up and flourish in Cortland. In 1883, a gentleman named Morris Kurtz observed, "1883 has come and is rapidly passing away, but it is leaving traces of unprecedented prosperity. 300 new buildings have been erected or are contracted for and are being built this year. New streets are being opened. Ground has been broken, and the work of building commenced for a new factory in which a large number of working men will be employed. Other enterprises are in prospect. The industrial and commercial interests of the village are in the most highly prosperous condition. And it is no longer chiefly noted for the location of the normal school, but is noted for its wagon, carriage, sleigh, wire goods, and other manufactories." The railroad and Cortland County prospered together. The Wickwire Brothers factory, which began in 1874, was a keystone industry. The Cortland Wagon Works grew overnight into another major industry, putting Cortland on the map. These industries, as well as dairies, maple sugar, and syrup manufacturing, provided a daily tonnage for the trains. In 1869, the Syracuse, Binghamton, and New York came under the control of the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad, but continued to operate under its original name until 1912. Its passenger and freight stations were located on Railroad Street, now known as Central Avenue. Between 1870 and the turn of the century, a number of other railroads came into being. Some never got off the drawing boards. Others, such as the Ithaca and Cortland Railroad, supported by Ezra Cornell, became the Elmira, Cortland, and Northern Railroad, the EC&N. This line established through train service between Ithaca and Utica. En route between these 2 points, intermediate stops were made at Freeville, where the EC&N intersected with the Southern Central Railroad, then to Cortland, stopping at the station located on Railroad Avenue, now South Avenue. From there on to Homer, Truxton, and DeRuyter, where the route swung southeast to Norwich and then north to Utica. The Elmira, Cortland, and Northern Railroad would become part of the Lehigh Valley system before the century was over. The Erie and Central Railroad operated over a roadbed laid between Cortland and Cincinnatus. This line was affectionately known to many Cortland County people as the Gee Whiz line, and on its rails, the G Brook Express, carrying mail, milk, passengers, and freight twice each day, chuffed gallantly up the grade through East Freetown, rumbled cautiously over the long wooded trestle at G Brook, and whistled grandly on and down into Cincinnatus. In 1903, it was purchased by the DL&W. Improvements were made in the trestle over G Brook in 1909, and its passenger service continued until January 14, 1939. By the end of the century, the village of Cortland had grown into a city, and the railroad fed that growth with raw materials for its factories and millions of tons of supplies for its population. One cannot make the turn into the 20th century without a parting look at the Cortland-Homer Horse Railroad. Beginning service in 1882, it operated out of a car barn just north of the fairgrounds on Homer Avenue. This is where the Plank Motors now stands. By 1885, the Horse Railroad was operating over 4.6 miles of track between Cortland and the north end of the village of Homer. Additional miles were in operation in the city by 1894. It was in this year that the move toward electrification took place. The first electric cars made their runs between Cortland and Homer to the car barns in 1895 under the new name of the Cortland and Homer Traction Company. The company completely rebuilt the horse railway and converted the car barn to house the electric cars. The first 2 electric passenger cars to operate over the line were locally built by the Cortland Omnibus and Cab Company. There was a great deal of local pride in this, with one of the newspapers stating, "These are the first cars which this company has ever built." But it was the unanimous opinion of all that for beauty of line, of finish, and of decoration, and for roominess and convenience, they are not surpassed by any of the cars built by the well-known builders of many years' experience. And few cities can show upon their streets cars as handsome and as fine in every respect as these. They are fitted with the necessary arrangements for brilliantly lighting and comfortably heating by electricity. The Cortland Omnibus and Cab Company would later become the Brockway Motor Truck Company. In late August 1895, service was extended to McGraw via bridge across the river at Elm Street. The first car arrived in the village at noon amid a greeting of bell ringing and noon whistle blowing. Although the passenger service was the most heralded, this extension to McGraw, like much of the railroad growth at the time, was primarily to provide a freight service which would link local industries to outside markets. Between 1895 and 1900, traction company operations flourished. The route extended north from the Lehigh Valley Railroad Station on Railway Avenue in the city to the fairgrounds on Homer Avenue, then into Homer. By 1905, it traveled as far north as Preble, with an intermediate stop at the Pavilion at Little York. The trip from Cortland to Homer via the traction company car might begin just around the corner of Main Street at the Lehigh Valley station. The car then turns onto Main Street and heads north. A glance to our left up Tompkins Street shows very little traffic at this early hour. As we approach the Court Street intersection, several fashionable ladies cross the street to browse in the downtown stores. The Wallace Building on the corner is where we find the Home Dairy Coffee Shop today. I see the southbound car is just about to pass us. As we look farther down Main, we see Hotel Cortland, or Cortland House as it was known in those days. There always seemed to be a crowd getting on at this point, especially so if the fair was in progress. On the right side of the street, it's difficult to miss the Burgess Building at the corner where Railroad Street intersects Main. Mr. Burgess has been in this location since about 1887. Railroad Street leads to the DL&W station. Just a bit down from here is the Cortland Democrat. Their success as a newspaper and printer necessitated the erection of this building in 1890. We're just about to the Cortland House now. As I said, there's a bunch of folks waiting to get on board. This is the new Cortland House, opened in 1885. The old one burned down around Thanksgiving in the big fire of '83. Looking west on Groton from here, we see the Opera House on the right. Built at a cost of $43,000, it seats 1,000 people on a good night. The tracks branch off here going west on Groton and then turning north onto Homer Avenue, eventually to rejoin the main line near the hospital. This branch was abandoned at the turn of the century. As we wait here in front of the Cortland House, a glance to our right down Clinton Avenue treats us to a view of the Elm Street car, which may be on its way in from McGraw. When the DL&W passenger trains arrive, the train car, as it was known, shuttled people from the station on Railroad Street up to Church Street, over to Clinton Avenue, eventually to deposit many of the travelers here at the Cortland House. Sure are a lot of comings and goings this morning. Well, as we get going again up North Main Street, we'll be passing our competition, F.H. Miracle Livery, located just adjacent to the Cortland House. We're nothing more than a passing fancy to them, I suppose. As we look back down Main Street, it seems as though the traffic is picking up. It can get pretty crowded here sometimes, what with the trolleys, buggies, and bicycles. Summer is the busiest time for the traction company, especially with Fair Week in August. On our right is Mr. S.M. Benjamin's Monument Works. He opened this business on North Main in 1854. This is one of the oldest businesses in Cortland. We pick up speed after our turn onto Homer Avenue from North Main. That's the Gillette Skirt Manufacturing Company on our right. The ability to ship goods by railroad makes it possible to locate industries of this type in our area. Well, here we are at the fairgrounds. No wonder it was so quiet downtown. Everyone was here. The car will now continue on into Homer as its last stop before turning around for its journey back. The Homer streets aren't paved yet, so it does get a bit messy at times. The trip from Cortland to the fairgrounds cost about a nickel in those days. After 1900, the traction line extended as far as Preble. In 1905, Little York Park was laid out and built by the traction company. The park formally opened Memorial Day, 1906. For the next 2 decades, the trolley brought county residents to the park for dances, band concerts, boat rides, and good times. In 1929, this line succumbed to the auto, and the 6.25-mile line from Main Street and Hooker Avenue in Homer to Preble was abandoned. All passenger service on the line came to an unheralded end in 1931. The officials and employees posed for the photograph to mark that final day. It was the end of an era. By the early 1900s, the many lines serving the city and county had been combined into 2 major ones, the Lehigh Valley and the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western, or DL&W Railroad. The Lehigh Valley, on its northbound trip out of Freeville, entered the city at its southwest corner and crossed Tompkins Street and Owega Street as it approached the depot on South Avenue, Railroad Avenue in those days. This station, constructed in 1911, has continued to retain its charm over the years. The third rail now occupies the elegant structure that has weathered the years quite well despite a succession of owners. Its sweeping roofline and graceful arches still remind us of an age of elegant travel. Passenger service thrived in the early decades of the 20th century, but the freight operation, although housed in a less imposing structure down the tracks, represented the vital contribution to the city's growth. It was the Lehigh Valley line that served the Wickwire Brothers Wire Works. This industry, from its creation in 1874 until its succession of operation in 1971, was a cornerstone of Cortland's development. The railroads made it possible by bringing raw material in and taking finished products to a world market. From the depot on Railroad Avenue, the Lehigh Valley line traveled east through Cortland Junction, where it crossed the DL&W tracks, and then turned north, crossing Port Watson Street as it headed out toward Cazenovia and points beyond. The DL&W, in its transit from Syracuse south to Binghamton, passed under the Homer Avenue Viaduct and crossed Clinton Avenue in its approach to the station on Railroad Street, now Central Avenue. This station was built in 1902 as a replacement for the earlier structure, which was located on an adjacent site. Its proximity to the heart of the city and its manufacturing centers guaranteed a grand opening crowd on that June day. With numerous trains, both freight and passenger, passing through here daily, carriages, trolleys, and automobiles were frequently queued up at the station. The tracks through the city were lined with heavy industries such as Brockway motor trucks and Cortland forging. Railroad corridors were also the main industrial corridors, mute testimony to their interdependence. The years prior to World War II saw both passenger and freight service flourish locally as well as nationally. Over a dozen passenger trains daily stopped in Cortland. Freight operations burgeoned. The late 30s signaled the beginning of the slow decline of passenger service. Although trains such as the Lackawanna's Phoebe Snow were popular symbols of the excitement, adventure, and comfort of traveling by rail, the railroads saw their future in freight, not passengers. Communities along the railroad's right-of-way began hearing a new sound which signaled the end of railroading's most romantic chapter. The hiss of steam was replaced with the diesel whine. For Cortland and the railroads serving her, the conversion to diesel represented the revitalization of an uncertain industry. The years following World War II saw the transition to diesel, but also saw a gradual reduction in service. For the city, many of the heavy industries which were dependent on the railroads either declined or satisfied their needs through other forms of transportation. The growth of bus service and the automobile had a severe effect on passenger volume. In 1958, the last passenger train made its run out of Cortland. Spiegel Wilcox Band marked the occasion. In 1960, the DL&W became the Erie Lackawanna. One Conrail freight a day now passes through on the old DL&W right-of-way. Remnants of the past are still here to remind us. The Owego Street Roundhouse, once alive with men and machines with the sounds of steam and smells of oil and coal, and where impatient leviathans did their graceful pirouettes. We have documented its glory and demise. That which is left speaks for itself.
Love, oh love, oh careless love. Love, oh careless love. Well, it's love, oh careless love. You see what careless love has done. How I wish that train would come. How I wish that train would come. Oh, how I wish that train would come and take me back where I come from. Love, oh careless love. Love, oh careless love. Well, it's love, oh careless careless love you see.
Like a tattered dress, the remnants still evoke fond memories. The interstate and the 18-wheelers now do what the railroads did for Cortland County. In spite of this, we struggle to hold on to this fragile thread because it was a time of excitement and adventure which enables all of us to see the present as a reflection of the past.
Nighttime on the city of New Orleans, changing cars in Memphis, Tennessee. Halfway home, we'll be there by morning. Through the Mississippi darkness, rolling down to the sea. But all the towns and people seem to fade into a bad dream, and the steel rail still ain't heard the news. The conductor sings his songs again. The passengers will please refrain. This train's got the disappearing railroad blues. Good night, America, I love you.
Train was really important to McGraw because we were somewhat isolated. And in the 1890s, when the corset industry started up, no way to ship out except by railroad. So it was really important to us. At about that same time, Daniel Lamont was down in Washington, D.C., serving as Secretary of War for Grover Cleveland, President. And every once in a while, he would have his private car hooked up to the end of the train that was coming up through to Cortland from Washington, have it pulled off to a siding down here, and he'd tell his mother, who was living in what the library now, her home, that he had open house. He wanted to see everybody in the village. Anybody wanted to come and see him. And so that was another plus for the train. My mother-in-law took the train to, and sometimes the trolley to Cortland, to go to Cortland Normal in the 1920s. So you see it was used a lot of different ways. When the railroad closed, the village had the opportunity to buy the railroad bed. And we thought it was a great idea if we said to the people whose backyards bordered up to it, would they like to buy it? Well, then we didn't know the problem was going to occur. Some of them would say, well, I want to own it all the way over to the other side, not in the middle. And somebody would, right over on that side, would say, no, I want to own it over to that side. We thought, bad idea. So the village still owns the railroad bed. And it's been a good bike trail. Once in a while, there's somebody that'll go down it and trim it back from, branches and whatever. It would make a great hiking trail, I think. The other thing I thought of, this has nothing to do with railroads, although wick wires was mentioned. 1890 House is looking for stories about people who worked in the factory, wick wire factory, or served as help in the house. And if any of you have stories they'd like to have you come to the 1890 House, you can either call me and I can give you a phone number, or you can stop at the 1890 House. I don't know what the hours are, but they're trying to put together a collection of stories and interviews and photographs. I knew nothing about the wick wires because I came here in 1960. Wick wires lived up on South Hill before they came down and went into Cortland. I didn't know about the factory. I heard about, a man that was sitting next to me said, oh, I can remember somebody telling my dad about so-and-so fell in the vat today. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. Or somebody got hurt with a crane. I heard that they were good bosses, but I guess they were tough bosses too. Probably, wanted to make some money. And OSHA would probably close them down today. It's a good thing they aren't there. If you have stories or photographs, they'd love to have them. So keep it in mind.